Anna Winger wrote and executive produced Unorthodox for Netflix. I'm Riley Chow of Gold Derby. This miniseries tells the story of a young woman who leaves New York for Berlin, but you said that you don't like to call it an escape. Why is that?
Because I think the word escape implies that the place she's leaving is an undesirable place to be. And I don't think we don't see it that way. You know, it's many people, most people who live there would never leave and are very happy. And, you know, we never set out to make an anthropology of that community, you know, or sort of be the definitive word on Satmar culture. For us, it was really the story of this one young woman and her, actually a young man, who were, you know, set out to find themselves and go on this journey. You know, in her case, she really sets out to find herself. And in the case of her husband, in a way, he finds himself in the process of looking for her. So it was those journeys that interested us. It was less, we never wanted to make a kind of indictment of Satmar culture or anything like that. So it was, that's why I don't think of it as an escape. Somehow escape seems very black and white.
Now, people are really impressed with the all the detail, all the specificity of the show. But this is a community that not many were so familiar with before watching it. It really gave them an education. So why do you think people are so impressed with the details, even though they might not necessarily know whether they're accurate or not?
Well, I think one of the things it depends on who's talking, right? I think if you live in LA or New York, cities where there are, you know, there are Hasidic communities, London, then you of course have seen people who are Hasidic and wondered about them, but have had very little chance to understand anything about them, right? So in that sense, some people are coming to it already with curiosity about it. I think a lot of people in the world who enjoyed the show, like in India and in Argentina, Saudi Arabia, probably have never seen anyone like this and didn't even know they existed or knew nothing about them beforehand, but just are really like being pulled into a story that has its own, like that the specificity gives this richness of detail to the experience of being in a constructed world. You know, television is always like you're making this world up. You know, I make another show that is about the Stasi, and we're also making up East Germany. You know, this is a world that's gone by. It takes place in 1980s, and it's and there's something about getting really detailed about creating a world on television that really feels like this portal into something else. And I think the details are part of it, but we did work really hard in this case. One, because we wanted to be respectful. Two, because we were interested. And we had a guy who worked with us named Eli Rosen, who played the rabbi, and he also translated the Yiddish, and he worked with the actors on the Yiddish. He was a coach and translator, but and he explained many things. You know, for me as a writer, it's not just translating the words, it's also explaining to us how they would be understood by the actors and how they would sorry, not by the actors, excuse me, by the characters, like what these words mean to them and how they see the world differently and how they articulate that. That was very interesting. So I guess I am generally attracted to projects that involve a deep dive into something that I don't know everything about. And as someone, you know, if there's a spectrum of Jewish experience, the Satmar are at one end and I'm at the other, but there are things about the culture that's of course familiar to me anyway. And through doing all this research, I definitely felt much deeper understanding of where they're coming from.
Whenever you do a project that is so specific to a specific culture, community, you're inevitably going to get people who say like, oh, you know, this isn't exactly how it happened.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, are there any of those kinds of criticisms where you actually do concede and you're like, oh, well, maybe if I made it again, I would do this particular thing a bit differently?
Well, you know, I get it a lot for the 80s. You know, this isn't my first time at the rodeo. So with Deutschland, we get notes where people tell us all the time, like, those Adidas sneakers actually came out in 1984, not in 83. You know, there's people who tell you, they always tell you when you got something wrong. So I think in a way you have to take it with a grain of salt because it is television and we're trying, but there's also a lot of different opinions about everything. You know, it's even on set, we probably had, in the case of Unorthodox, probably 10 different people who came from the community who were involved in the show in some way. And they didn't always agree on every detail, you know, so we made mistakes, but then we were trying really hard. And we also always tried to get the essence of it right, you know, because there's the psychological reality and then there's the, you know, the details. And we always try to see the world of Unorthodox through Este's eyes, whether it's Williamsburg or Berlin, you know. By the way, we got a lot of criticism from Germans who said, you know, Berlin isn't that great, especially Germans who live in other parts of Germany, like Munich. They were like, you know, I don't think Berlin's that great when I go there. We were like, that seemed like such a funny criticism, you know. So we got it from, you know, of course, but you know, it's our version of Berlin, and it's yeah, I guess TV is aspirational in certain ways, and it's heightened. You know, you're seeing Berlin through Este's eyes as she's discovering the world for the first time. So that was important to us.
Now, I follow TV all year long, but the first I ever heard of Unorthodox was, you know, when it was already out. So can you talk about the timeline of making the show?
Yeah, it was actually really quick. Deborah Feldman, who wrote the original memoir, is a mom at my school, so we knew each other. Like our kids go to school together, and she suggested that I make a TV show of her book, and we're friends. But the deal was that I couldn't, because it's a memoir. It's an amazing book, but it's very in her mind, and you know, I don't usually write from existing material, so I haven't really adapted a book before. So I felt like it was important to have the freedom to kind of break it apart and turn it into something new. And so when she agreed to that, then, you know, Netflix is kind of new to Germany, and we had been talking about doing something together, and they went for this, and they agreed to shoot it in Yiddish and everything. And to be fair, they were totally supportive, but they just wanted it really soon. So I would say Alexa and I started writing in like November 2018, and we delivered the whole thing in December 2019. So it was fast. And we were like casting, writing, you know, mood boarding. I mean, just we were doing researching everything at the same time. It was a very intense year.
What's the division of labor between the two of you? Are you both like co-show running?
No, I was the showrunner. I mean, Alexa is a documentary filmmaker, so it was her first time working on a TV show. And you know, I come to this show from my other show, so I mean, I'm also pretty new to this, to be honest with you, but I never wrote a screenplay till I was 40. But I had more experience making a television show, you know, and also, I guess I sort of come to it really as a writer, and she comes to it in a way more as a director. But we conceived of the project together, and then it was just such a pleasure to work with someone I respect so much and who's also my good friend, because we could divide certain things, you know, like she could go to Israel for live castings while I was finishing scripts. You know, we could divide it up in certain ways. And that also went for working with Maria, who is the star of my other show. So, you know, everybody's connected. You know, it's I think one thing I've noticed just doing some of these interviews with showrunners from big American shows is, like, I think big American shows are much more structured and hierarchical, and they're also there's a lot more people involved. Like, we don't have that many people involved. It's a much more intimate constellation, you know. So there's a lot of like, okay, all hands on deck, like I'm gonna do this and you do that, and you know, everybody's kind of in it together. And that was also true with the heads of department. Everybody was sort of very intensely involved with each other. So yeah, in terms of me and Alexa, you know, first we worked alone when we were just breaking the book apart and you know, writing the first drafts of the scripts. But pretty quickly everybody else came on board and was like doing costumes for like episode 3 while we were still refining the scripts. You know, it's like everything kind of accelerated at once. Does that make sense? Did I answer the
Yeah,
question?
no, that's great. I noticed that she is credited as a co-writer on 3 of the 4 episodes. And then for the Emmys in the outstanding writing category, the one that Netflix is actually campaigning is the one that only you wrote. So if you were
Well, that
nominated,
was, to be honest with you, I don't know why. I wrote the first episode by myself. I think for me as like head writer or whatever, I needed to crystallize something about the voice and everything. Like I needed that time alone with the writing, but that's just that's a process. And I actually didn't even know that until you just said it. I haven't, listen, we would be so lucky to be nominated for Emmys. You know, we're like the little engine that could. We made a show in Yiddish. It's like our like passion project here in Berlin, and I'm not going to spend too much time wishing for those kinds of prizes. It's just not, you know, that would be, I shouldn't think about that too much. So you know what I mean.
yeah.
It's just, that's not that. I don't, yeah, we, how do I explain this? Like it's, I just said to Netflix that I trusted them to do this how they saw fit.
Okay, so going back to the plot of the show, why does the Berlin section take place in only a few days? It happens very quickly.
Actually, the whole show takes place only in a few days.
Yes.
In the end, it's really like a week. And you know, it's a funny question. I love that you asked that because I've noticed something in writing screen. Like, okay, often you set out to write something and you imagine it taking place over a more extended period of time. But once you get into the nitty gritty of it, one thing follows the next and it sort of becomes much closer together. I don't know if you've ever written a TV show, but it's like, well, I'm sure you will eventually. And it's, you know, that it's like the time is something that starts to condense, or this always happens to me, that it wasn't intentional in that sense, but it did end up working like that. So it goes pretty quickly because in the end we decided to locate it between Shabbat and Shabbat. So because that's a very distinctive event in the lives of everyone involved, if Yankee and Moisha had continued to stay in Berlin past Shabbat, then we would have had to deal with Shabbat.
Mm.
That was part of it, you know. So it sort of made it neatly take place in their time frame, you know, and how they see the week. But I think there was a moment in the development process where we imagined it taking place over a couple of months.
Now, what about at the end? Why does Essie not find out about her grandmother?
That's an interesting question. Well, I suppose it's because there's no one to tell her. But I'm assuming that she will ultimately find out. You know, we leave certain things open. We liked the idea of milking, you know, 4 juicy hours for like maximum emotional experience, but leaving a few things for the audience to decide on their own. You know, does she get into the school? Does she stay with Robert? Does she ever see, you know, does she have contact with her family again? These are things we kind of deliberately left open because we thought we answered a lot of questions and we wanted to leave a few things to the imagination.
Yeah, and finally, how did you land on setting it at those 4 one-hour episodes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, people ask me that a lot because it's such an unusual format, although I think it's kind of a great one because it's somewhere between a series and a movie. Like it's built episodically, which I really like. It has the kind of propulsivity in the storytelling of a series, but in the end, the minutes are probably the same length as The Irishman or something. You know, so it's somewhere in between, and there's some way in which it was the first project that I you know, developed and produced and, you know, everything with my own company. And I really felt like 4 hours was something I could wrap my arms around completely, you know, and I could really, we could come together and just make this really juicy 4-hour arc, you know, and that felt and then like I said, Netflix were really supportive. They were like, do you want it to be 8 episodes? Do you want it to be 6 episodes? And somehow each of the episodes in Unorthodox feels like very much like has its own juicy arc, but it's also part of a whole in a way that's really satisfying. That I think had it been, let's say, 8 episodes, I've written 8 before, I've written 10 before for other shows, and it's, I think, I don't know, just it's almost like the material speaks to you and gives itself a shape. And we have that with the luxury now with streaming, that you can make different shapes of shows. Do you know what I mean? So, like, I love a half-hour drama. That's something that just didn't exist before. So it's kind of fun to think about different ways to tell stories. And this is where we landed with this one.
All right, Anna. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. We have other interviews with unorthodox people on our YouTube channel, and you can go to goldderby.com to make your own Emmy predictions.